In the cursed land of Slovenia, it is not the living who claim dominance. A powerful lord has returned to lay claim to the empire, making dark plans in the depths of Castle Drakenhof. Count Manfred von Carstein has returned to Slovenia, and it is only a matter of time before the old world trembles in terror at his hands. The vampire counts will rise once more, and the vampire wars shall begin anew. Manfred's story begins during the years leading up to the reign of Vlad von Carstein, first of the vampire counts. Vlad likely found Manfred somewhere within the empire, and seems to have seen something of himself in Manfred. The elder von Carstein looked upon Manfred as a son, and taught the boy necromancy before eventually giving him the blood kiss. Manfred was extremely gifted in the necromantic arts, and played his role well as an acolyte wizard in the ranks of Vlad's army. Despite this, like all vampires, Manfred was anything but loyal, and schemed in the shadows towards his own ends. Manfred's ploys and sorceries were prepared as the hordes of Vlad neared Altdorf for the final battle of the Vampire Wars to claim the Empire. Upon encircling the capital, the father of the von Carstein bloodline gave his usual speech to the defenders of Altdorf, giving them the option to surrender in life or serve in death. Vlad gave the Empire a few days to reach their decision, and prepared for the siege along with all of his line. However, what he did not realize was that Manfred had other designs. While most of the vampire counts prepared their hosts for war, Manfred used his sorceries to lend aid to the men of the Empire. The Grand Theogonist of that age, Wilhelm III, had sealed himself deep beneath the Temple of Sigmar, praying for answers. When he received visions and hints about the weakness of Vlad, the High Priest believed Sigmar had guided him, rather than the more sinister truth. Now with a plan, the lords of the Empire played their desperate gambit, and sent the best thief of the age, Felix Mann, to take a ring from Vlad von Carstein's hand. Felix entered the camp of the vampires, though mysteriously without incident, and found the dark tent in which most of the undead lords slept during the day. Here he found Vlad, and slipped the ring from the vampire's finger before making his escape. He failed to notice the one vampire who was awake at the time, carefully observing the thief, but making no attempts to stop him. When Vlad awoke, he went into a terrible rage, ordering his hordes to attack the capital of the Empire. However, without his ring, Vlad was vulnerable, and when he finally died, impaled on wooden stakes thanks to the sacrifice of the Grand Theogonist, the army of the vampire counts collapsed. Unaware that their victory was more due to Manfred's treachery than anything else, the men of the Empire decided to lick their wounds instead of pursue the retreating army. As the undead fell back to Slovenia, the void left by Vlad's absence needed to be filled. Of the remaining vampires, only 5 were turned by Vlad himself, and thus had the right to take over. These were Konrad, Pieter, Fritz, Hans, and Manfred. Fritz von Carstein died attempting to besiege Middenheim, like Vlad before him. Hans was torn apart by Konrad after the latter instigated a fight. Pieter was slain in his coffin by Helmut van Hal, a witch hunter of notable skill who was descended from the infamous necromancer. However, despite his skill, Van Hal had aid in locating Pieter, for Manfred himself led the holy hunter to his blood brother's resting place. After the death of Pieter in 2094, Manfred left Slovenia, content to let his mad brother Konrad take over for a time. He journeyed far across the world in search of arcane knowledge in order to increase his own power. Eventually, von Carstein made a pilgrimage to Lamia, the cursed birthplace of the vampires, where Fel Neferata once ruled as queen. Here, he studied the Drombai papyrus of the Lich Priest lore, learning many of their secrets about magic. The vampire lord then wandered further until he came across the first of the Books of the Dead, studying their ancient spells. Then, Manfred journeyed to the dark fortress of Nagashazar, which in ages past was the invincible fortress of Nagash. Here, Manfred struck a bargain with the wretched disciples of Nagash and the other terrible beings that reside in the great Necromancer's bastion. He agreed to do his part to assist in bringing back Nagash, and in return was granted forbidden knowledge of immense power. With his advancements in magical lore, Manfred returned to Slovenia many times stronger than he had left. He arrived less than a year after the death of Conrad to the alliance of dwarves and men. Yet rather than immediately launching into another invasion like most vampires would have, Manfred instead decided to bide his time. He went and searched the ruins of Castle Drachenfels, uncovering the blighted blade Geistvor. After discovering his sword, von Carstein returned to Castle Drachenhof and forged his magical armor, as well as eliminating all of his potential rivals. For a full decade, Manfred gathered his might. He wandered across the empire, gathering all of the other bloodlines into one unified force under his banner. Whether through coercion, flattery, or bribery, Manfred acquired the largest force of vampires seen since the time of Nagash. He spent months traveling through the wilderness of the empire, raising terrible wights and spirits while also gathering monstrosities to his side. During this time, Manfred appeared to all that met him as a courteous imperial lord, proving that his ability to hide his true nature was almost equal to that of Vlad. As the years wore on, Manfred successfully gathered all types of vampires, undead, and monsters to him as Slovenia prepared for war. Eventually, the empire fell back into civil war yet again. With this development, Manfred finally decided to strike. Manfred revealed his true appearance, showing his corpse-like and contorted face as his bald scalp writhed with magical energy. As all of the Elector Counts were trying to recover as winter settled in, the undead marched out of Slovenia in an unstoppable tide. The Winter War of 2132 was a terrible affair for the Empire, as Manfred brutally crushed every army sent to oppose him. The Vampire Count marched towards Altdorf with sinister mirth building as his horde swelled with every victory. After only a single season, Manfred stood before the massive walls of Altdorf. The imperial capital looked virtually deserted, and the Vampire Count couldn't help but swell with triumph. However, it was at this point that the Grand Theogenes Kurt III appeared on the walls and began reading from the Liber Mortis, a powerful tome that had been locked away beneath the Temple of Sigmar till now. As he intoned the great spell of unbinding from its pages, the entire undead army began to collapse into dust. Alarmed at the spell's effect, Manfred immediately ordered a swift retreat as he realized Altdorf could not be taken. Unwilling to surrender so easily, the Vampire Count marched his horde down the Reich River, capturing every vessel he passed along the way, and crewing them with the raised corpses of their crews. He made his way towards Marienburg and prepared to lay siege to the port city. The Vampire Count intended to tire his foes with a battle on land as his zombie fleet approached from the ocean. However, he suffered a series of setbacks as the mercenary army of Marienburg resisted his land forces. Annoyed, Manfred ordered the construction of massive war machines and prepared for a long siege. However, around this time his scouts reported an army marching from Altdorf coming from behind. and so the Lord of Slovenia had to lift the siege and retreat once more. Thus began a series of running battles between Manfred and the Empire. The balance of power between the two forces shifted with almost every battle. For instance, the Imperial army of Ostermark surrounded the undead at Horstenbad, managing to slaughter half of Manfred's army before the Vampire Count made his escape. Yet, less than a month later, he raised a new army from the inhabitants of Felf, and when the men of the Empire attacked, he unleashed an immense magical storm of purple lightning that killed most of his foes, providing him with even more zombies. The war carried on for a few years as the Empire and the Vampire Count traded blows. Twice, Manfred was pushed all the way into Slovenia, though the first time he utterly annihilated the army sent in to defeat him. On the second push into the Dark Realm, the Empire united along with the dwarves, hoping their combined efforts could put an end to the Vampire Counts once and for all. The forces of order scoured the Slovenian woods, relentlessly pursuing Manfred until he finally turned to face them at Hel Fen. The Vampire Count had stopped here for good reason, as he raised seemingly endless amounts of zombies from the murky swamp. Despite the fact that well over half of the Empire's forces perished in the pursuit of Manfred, their determination would not be denied, as they continued forward, cutting through his undead horde. Seeing that victory was out of his grasp, Manfred turned to flee upon his skeletal horse. However, the last Vampire Count did not make it very far. At the fringe of Hel Fen, he was caught by the Elector Count of Stirlin upon his majestic griffin, who traded blows with the final von Carstein. Although heavily wounded, the Lord of Stirlin was victorious and cut down Manfred with his runefang. The vampire's butchered corpse fell into the swamp and sunk deep into the mud. Thus passed Manfred von Carstein, last of the Vampire Counts. Or so the world was led to believe. In truth, Manfred did not die that day. He survived his wounds at Hel Fen and managed to use the murky depths of the swamp to escape. Yet he knew the war was lost, and instead decided to take a more cautious approach. He spent the first few years building up an impressive spy network along the entirety of the Old World, seemingly emulating Lamian tactics. As his forces and strongholds were rebuilt, Manfred went on one more journey to the south. He attempted to re-enter ancient Lamia to search for a lost artifact of immense power. However, he was unpleasantly surprised as this time his entry to the fallen city was marked by the Tomb Kings, meaning the city was soon surrounded by the forces of Liberus, led by none other than High Queen Khalida. Manfred raised an army of his own to battle the favored daughter of Asaph, and even met her in battle, yet the Vampire Count was no match for the Serpent Queen. With his army decimated by poisonous arrows, and being personally wounded by the quicksilver blows of Khalida, Manfred made a hasty retreat back to Slovenia. However, upon his return, the vampire made an interesting discovery. Through his spies, he learned both Stirland and Averland had claimed ownership of Slovenia, and tensions were riding high between the two provinces. Despite the fact his forces were rebuilt and ready for another war, Manfred had no desire to engage the Empire yet again. He had immense freedom to pursue his own goals, so long as the world thought the vampire threat ended. So von Carstein was content to observe the two provinces competing for his land. When the animosity between Stirland and Averland reached its height, Manfred struck quickly through his network of spies, feeding both sides false information. It did not take long for civil war to erupt with Slovenia as the battleground, which served the vampire well as the amount of available corpses was replenished. The war also served by allowing him to move mostly unnoticed, as any of his more bloody actions were merely blamed on the opposing faction. He watched the war with interest, even keeping an eye out for the most bloodthirsty of soldiers to reward with a blood kiss. The two provinces remained heavily at war for many years. There were times of peaceful unity, however, such as when Magnus the Pious rallied the Empire to face the threat of chaos. Even Manfred turned his attention to the hordes of Azabar Kul, and rumor has it he rode out to do battle against numerous chaos armies that splintered off from the main host. After this brief period of peace, though, von Carstein returned to his game of manipulating Sturland and Averland into butchering one another, generation after generation. However, this was a mere amusing distraction to Manfred, and as the years passed he finally lost interest and turned his full attention to his research of Nagash's lore. With Manfred no longer intervening, the enmity between Sturland and Averland finally faded as Averland relinquished its claim, not even having the forces to properly garrison the accursed land any longer. Deciding it was time to fulfill his end of the pact with the Wraith Wizards of Nagashazar, Manfred made his move to help summon the Great Necromancer. Yet he only desired to contribute one piece to this puzzle, which was finding a pure and innocent soul, which was an important component for resurrecting Nagash. He could also achieve another goal though, a more selfish ambition to aid his own designs while completing his bargain with the acolytes of Nagash. During the Great War against Chaos, Manfred had noted that the alliance of elves, men, and dwarves was able to defeat the mightiest forces even Chaos could muster. Against such a force, he would stand no chance. Thus, the last vampire count devised a plan to not only capture the innocent soul he required, but to sunder the alliance between the races of Order. Manfred departed for the Grey Mountains south of the Empire, traveling as quietly as he could while passing through the Empire in Bretonnia. He carved a swath of bloody ruin through the few forces that mobilized to hunt him before finally locating his target. He had found them, Heinrich Kemmler and the White King Krell. Under a full moon, Manfred told the two of his plan, and the Lich Master readily agreed, more than happy to assist in a plan to savage the civilized worlds that he had left. And of course, wherever Kemmler went, Krell was never far behind. The alliance of Manfred and Kemmler proved nearly unstoppable. Von Carstein wanted to capture the Everchild, the daughter of the Phoenix King and the Everqueen of the High Elves. However, she was defended by a large host of dwarves and elves. Yet the Vampire Count had no desire to play fair, using agents to whip all of the nearby orc tribes into a frenzied mob that came crashing down on the allied forces of Order. As the elves and dwarves were busy fighting the Greenskins, Manfred made his move. He slaughtered his way into the army with the assistance of Krell and Kemmler, completely overwhelming the elves defending the Everchild. Despite the noble efforts of both elf and dwarf, the Vampire Count successfully kidnapped the Everchild. This failure to protect the future Everqueen of the High Elves reopened old wounds between the two races as insults were exchanged. Although things did not completely collapse, relations were strained. Manfred escaped with Aliathra, the Everchild, to Nagashazar, where he made ready for a ritual. Yet, before he was properly prepared, the fortress of Nagash was laid under siege by a combined army of High Elves and Dwarves. Leading the glittering host of the Elves was Tyrion, Prince of Ulthuan, mightiest warrior of his age. He had come to save the Everchild, who in secret was actually his daughter, not the Phoenix King's. On the other side of things, however, the dwarves matched to battle because High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer had been gravely insulted by having an ambassador kidnapped on his doorstep, so he marched on the undead lord with vengeance in mind. Manfred's hordes were absolutely butchered by the allied force, but despite this, the High Elves refused to properly ally with the dwarves due to their arrogance. This cost Tyrion everything, as in his moment of triumph saving his daughter, Mannfred was able to ambush the heroes of the High Elves and stole away with the Everchild yet again, vanishing into the night. With this act, the fragile alliance between the elves and dwarves fractured greatly, accomplishing the personal mission of Mannfred von Carstein. Soon, the old world would be his. And that about sums up the story of Mannfred von Carstein, so let's go ahead and move on to his equipment. Mannfred von Carstein is without a doubt the most magically adept of the von Carstein line, definitely on par with the likes of the Necrarchs. His equipment works towards his strength, augmenting his powers in various ways. First is his cursed blade, Geistvor. Manfred discovered this powerful weapon in the ruins of Castle Drachenfels. This sword of unholy power has the terrifying ability that whenever it tastes blood, it grants whoever wields it greater control over the winds of magic. Being able to transmute souls of the slain into raw necromantic power only increased Manfred's already unmatched sorceries. Next is the twisted armor of the last von Carstein. When Manfred returned to Slovenia after the death of Conrad, he called all of the remaining powerful von Carsteins together under a banner of truce. However, instead of keeping his word, Manfred attacked all of his rivals, slaying all of them and burning each of them down to ash. He then mixed their ashes with molten cursed iron, forging a suit of armor for himself. This product of twisted sorcery fused with Manfred's flesh, giving him tremendous endurance and adding his deceased rival's might to his own. The armor of Tempelhof then not only protects Manfred, but augments his magical power to be able to control amounts of undead only the mightiest of vampires could achieve. Lastly, during the end times, Manfred was elevated to the rank of one of Nagash's Mortarchs. Along with Neferata and Archon the Black, he received one of the legendary Dread Abyssals as a mount, as a sign of his rank. Manfred received Ashigaroth, also known as the Gorger upon the Meek. This hound of the underworld had a reputation for preferring to feast upon the souls of those too callow to defend themselves. This monster proved ideal for Manfred, for he also preferred striking at the weaker units in an army rather than risking himself in combat against their strongest soldiers. The last von Carstein greatly prefers obliterating his foes from range, though just like Ashigaroth, should he be forced to fight a courageous enemy, the Vampire Count has little issue cutting them down as well. With his equipment out of the way, let's go ahead and tackle the skill set of this Vampire Count. Most notable of all his skills, Mannfred von Carstein is the most cunning of his bloodline. While Vlad was the most physically powerful, and Conrad was a mad fool, Mannfred much preferred making schemes in the shadows. He is without a doubt one of the most clever vampires to ever live, capable of manipulating and fooling all but the sharpest of minds. Mannfred engineered the death of Vlad, purposefully left the ticking time bomb of Conrad in charge, and carefully waited to pounce on his foes till they were at their weakest. Had it not been for the Liber Mortis, Mannfred would have easily conquered Altdorf in a single season. Mannfred is also a surprisingly skilled diplomat. Although often portrayed as impatient, he clearly is skilled in negotiations, at least with other vampires, as he is the only one of his kind to ever unite all 5 of the bloodlines. He is also skilled at gathering all types of creatures to his banner, whether they be spirits, monsters, or wights. When it comes to the realm of sorcery, Mannfred von Carstein is without a doubt one of the most powerful necromancers alive. He can only be matched in sorcerous might by the greatest of necrarchs, and human necromancers of legend, such as Heinrich Himmler and Van Hal. Despite this, Mannfred is truly a terror on the battlefield, able to wield the lore of vampires and death with masterful skill. Hardly any can stand against him when the winds of magic blow strong, and few can maintain legions of the dead as effortlessly as Mannfred. And finally, when it comes to physical skill, The last vampire count is by no means lacking in terms of speed and strength. When compared against a man, Manfred is a terror, still easily capable of tearing a man limb from limb and cutting down foes with alarming speed. Yet, despite this, for an elite vampire, Manfred is really nothing special. Though it should be noted, the armor of Tempelhof does make him much tougher than all other vampires, due to it providing him with the magical prowess and vitality of numerous other vampires. With his skills now out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to his famous battle. Of all the battles Manfred von Carstein has ever fought in, few show off his abilities like the Battle of Mordkin Lair. Manfred had journeyed across the Badlands, searching for an artifact tied to Nagash, discovering that it was deep inside a large Skaven warren. Realizing that the caverns would likely be a trap-filled labyrinth, Manfred held back his elite Drakenhof Templars and instead sent forth his massive tide of zombies. The zombie horde shambled down into the depths, taking every possible passageway as Manfred used their eyes to map out the best route for his cavalry. As the zombies descended, they began to encounter the thousands of Skaven within the tunnels. Yet no matter how much the Skaven threw at the undead tide, the zombies just kept coming. The warlord of Clan Mortkin, Feskett, sent chieftain after chieftain to kill the undead legions, the Skaven first incinerating them with warp fire throwers, but the weapons misfired long before killing enough of the undead to make a difference. Manfred casually kept unleashing waves of dark magic, bringing the zombies up again and again to relentlessly clear the tunnels. Desperate, the Skaven fell back to their main cavern, which was a massive fortress that could only be accessed by a single bridge across a deep chasm. As the Skaven retreated across the bridge, the Warlock engineers ordered that they use their warp fire throwers to burn the bridge down to ensure the zombies could not pursue to the keep. Victorious in that effort, the Skaven unleashed their Jezzails and other long-range weaponry to begin pelting the shambling horde with warpstone bullets. Realizing the situation required his personal attention, Manfred led his cavalry through the tunnels by the widest route and before long arrived at the chasm. Ordering his knights to stay out of sight, Manfred marched up to the end of the crevice and began channeling the winds of magic. Upon sighting the vampire count, the Skaven turned their guns upon him and opened fire with squeals of excitement. However, their celebration turned quiet when Manfred dodged the hurtling bullets with contemptuous ease. More irritated than anything else, Manfred finished his spell and signaled his zombies forward. The Skaven watched in horror as each zombie was ripped apart as their bones melded into spear-like protrusions, anchoring themselves to the ground. Then the next wave of zombies came forward, going through a similar gruesome transformation and anchoring to the first set of spikes, reaching out over the chasm. As the bloody bone bridge began to expand over the gap, the Skaven hurriedly fired everything they had into the zombie bridge. Yet Manfred's magic was so overwhelming that he just kept moving the zombies forward faster than the Skaven could shoot them down. In a matter of minutes, the grotesque bone bridge reached the far side of the chasm, and Manfred signaled his knights forward with himself leading the charge. The Drakenhof Templars slammed into the fleeing Skaven, slaughtering them to a rat, and pressed onwards towards the Skaven fortress. As Manfred approached the fortress, he was disgusted by the Skaven's attempt at a powerful hold. The rickety structure was a mess of thrown-together parts, and the main gate was made from the ribcage of a great fire dragon the Skaven had murderously killed and devoured some time ago. Frustrated that this would likely be a prolonged siege, an idea crept into Manfred's mind, and he smiled sinisterly. Reaching deep into the winds of magic, Manfred fueled an immense amount of magical power into the dragon's corpse. In a matter of minutes, the colossal skeleton began to shift slightly, and the hordes of ratmen watched in utter despair as the titan tore itself free of the fortifications. With the gate now shattered by the movement of the zombie dragon, Manfred and his knights plowed into the Skaven beyond, as all hell broke loose in the cavern. It was at this point that the incensed Skaven warlord walked out to face the enemy assaulting his keep. Wielding the fell blade, Warlord Feskett was not an enemy Manfred could afford to toy with. The vampire lord launched forward to engage the Skaven, in what would prove to be a short affair. Feskett swung the fell blade for Manfred, which easily would have killed the vampire had it connected. But Manfred was faster and dodged aside, grabbing the warlord's arm and snapping it in on itself with terrifying ease. He then impaled the ratman with Geistfor in its stomach. After a few moments of staring down at the blood pooling around him, Feskett, warlord of Clan Mortken, fell forward dead. With the fell blade now in his possession, Manfred and his Drakenhof guard left the cavern. Though the vampire count did ensure that the zombie dragon had enough dark magic soaked into its bones so that it could continue its rampage against the disgusting Skaven for a few days more. And now, with his famous battle out of the way, I'm going to go ahead, as I always do, and do a brief summary over this character's contribution in the end times, which is a little difficult for Manfred because he was borderline one of the main characters. So we're just going to touch on everything that happened very, very quickly. So here we go. In the prequel to the end times, Manfred captured a number of people he needed for Nagash's ritual, including Volkmar the Grim, the Grand Theogenes of the Empire, Morgiana Le Fay, the Fey Enchantress who was given to him by Drycha, Aliathra the Everchild, who he captured, as we talked about earlier, before the end time started, and various members of other faith. So, using extremely powerful magic that he gained from capturing some more books of Nagash and other things of that nature, Manfred was able to seal Slovenia in a veil of permanent darkness. However, when he did this, Balthazar Gelt was able to counter him and sealed Slovenia within a wall of faith, which even Manfred could not pass through without taking notable damage. After this happened, he teamed up with Archon the Black. After the two tried to kill each other, they got over it and decided to ally to bring back Nagash. During this point, they split up to go reclaim certain artifacts that they needed of Nagash. Manfred cut through the Empire, the Badlands, and into the lair of Clan Mortken, which we just went over, where he reclaimed the fell blade that was used to cut off Nagash's hand. After that, he returned to Slovenia, where he had to deal with a lot of the invading forces, which was a pseudo-alliance of dwarves, elves, and men, but only the high elves actually made it to the 9 demons, where the ritual to bring back Nagash was performed. Manfred battled against Eltharion the Grim, and was not able to defeat him, but held him off long enough that Eltharion could not get to Archon in time, who did kill him. At this point, he attempted to steal Nagash's power, but Archon saw it coming and sealed the ritual within a bubble that Manfred could not penetrate, so he was left outside and just had to watch as Nagash was brought back to life. When Nagash did return, Manfred decided to side with him rather than just dying instantly. Nagash used Manfred's blood to resurrect Vlad von Carstein, and then when the servants of Nagash invaded Nehekara, Manfred went down and led one of the pronged invasions into the land of the dead, where he was attacked by a mostly entombed beneath the sand Tomb King army. He actually got surrounded and almost was destroyed, but he got saved by a timely intervention from Luther Harkin, the vampire pirate. Later on, during the end times, he was in charge of the northern defenses of Slovenia and was one of the first to see the army of demons that Nurgle sent down to deal with Nagash as the end times were coming to a close. He fought against 3 greater demons of Nurgle, and this is also where he found Isabella von Carstein, who had been revived by Nurgle and had a demon implanted in her mind to make her go crazy. Despite the fact he did do quite a bit of damage to Nurgle's force, Manfred was not able to defeat them, and ended up escaping, though in his escape he abandoned both Luther Harkin and Vlad, who both were killed. Vlad was able to come back thanks to his ring, but Mannfred completely got Luther Harkin killed. After this, he retreated back to the Black Pyramid, where Nagash was, and teamed up with Neferata and all of Nagash's greater minions. But here was where the Chaos Gods managed to outwit Nagash, and using the Skaven, they exploded the Black Pyramid from the inside, much to Nagash's wrath. So after that point, the undead went to Athel Loren to strike an alliance with the forces of order, because Nagash realized he could no longer fight the gods of chaos alone without the power he had stored in the pyramid. As a sign of good faith, to get the forces of order to at least moderately trust him, Nagash gave the elves Mannfred, telling them that he was the one who killed Aliathra, which isn't quite true, but it's close enough. So the elves decided to punish him by sealing him beneath the world tree, the giant godlike tree in the center of Athel Loren, and he was literally had roots stabbed into him so that the tree could draw sustenance from his magical life and would kill him over time. However, during this time was when Be'lakor, the first of the demon princes, showed up, and he struck a deal with Mannfred that he would free Mannfred in exchange for information that Mannfred knew the demon would want to have. And what information he had is, while the Nagash had been talking to the other incarnates, Mannfred had figured out that Lilith, the elven goddess, was also the Lady of the Lake, and that nobody realized it, which also meant that she was a god. So he told Be'lakor that she was a goddess, because Be'lakor was going to want to go devour and kill her. And so Be'lakor kept his end of the deal, freed him. And Mannfred, in a final act of spite, as he was leaving Athel Loren, was the one who told the Bretonnians that they had been manipulated all this time by the Lady of the Lake, and led to the Bretonnians having a falling out and abandoning the forces of order, which probably would have turned the tide of the final battle. After this, he fled to Middenheim, and joined Archaon alongside some other members of various races, who I won't say because their videos will come up sooner or later. While he was in Middenheim, though, he was only referred to by Archaon as Leech, and was never given any direct orders, because Archaon was disgusted by his cowardice. So he went to observe the elves fighting in Middenheim when the forces of order invaded it, and he was pursued by Vlad, but both of them ran into Isabella, who'd been Nurgle-fied, as I said earlier. And Mannfred fled once more, leaving Vlad to fight Isabella, where Vlad died, but he saved Isabella in the process. But Vlad met his permanent fate, and Isabella was freed from Nurgle's influence and was reborn pure, but Vlad was no longer with her. After this, we get to the final part of the end times. At the end of all things, the final battle, Mannfred von Carstein followed the incarnates down into the pit where Archaon unleashed his ultimate weapon to create a new portal to the realm of chaos right smack in the middle of the Empire. When he went down there, Mannfred basically had a choice. There were 7 individuals able to channel the 8 winds of magic to try and close the portal. And if Mannfred had joined them, he could have successfully stopped chaos and saved the world. But instead what he did, as you see in this image here, is he moved forward and impaled Balthazar Gelt from behind. This instantly killed Balthazar Gelt and unleashed the Wind of Metal, which resulted in killing Teclis as well. And the combination of these things led to the end of the world. As reward for aiding them, the gods of chaos struck Mannfred blind and filled his head with so many voices that he almost instantly went mad, though he was able to hang on to his sanity somewhat. But then Tyrion walked up behind him and quite justly impaled him with Sunfang, ignited Sunfang using its enchantment, and this caused Mannfred to literally burn alive from the inside out, until all that was left of him was a blackened husk. And that was the death and the end of Manfred von Carstein. Alright, and with that all finally out of the way, I can now get to my personal favorite segment, which is talking about how Manfred von Carstein should be in Total War Warhammer. I want to start by saying I'm really excited for this character. He has a lot of really interesting ideas about him. He's very clever, he's very cunning in a very shadowy sort of way. He draws influence almost from all of the bloodlines. I mean, he is a von Carstein, pure and simple, but he's such a powerful caster. He's kind of like a Necrarch. He has a very noteworthy network of spies that allowed him to manipulate two provinces into constant war, which makes him a lot like a Lamian. He is, of course, a von Carstein and owns up to that name really well. Strigoi and Blood Dragons are the two lines he doesn't connect as much to. But anyway, talking about how he'll function in the game. So I believe that his campaign is going to revolve around his initial goal that was set up in 8th edition, which is that he wanted to take over the Empire and accomplish what Vlad and Conrad could not. He always wanted to one-up Vlad, so to speak. Doing this would obviously require things like uniting the 5 bloodlines. So to get maybe all of your elite units, you have to go out and find the Neferata, Wallach Harkin, the Strigoi Ghoul Kings, and unite the vampire accounts under one banner, just like Manfred did about 500 years before the modern timeline in his first invasion of the Empire, after Conrad died. I expect him to be an extremely potent caster, as he is the most powerful caster in the Vampire Count army, with the exception of wights and skeletons. When it comes to the bony kind of undead, that's where Heinrich Kemmler reigns supreme. But in every other kind, so zombies and vampires, you're going to find, and monster beasts, creatures of the night, and things of that nature, is where you're going to find Manfred von Carstein taking the lead. So I'm hoping he'll be a really awesome caster. Mounts of things, we've already seen him on a zombie dragon in the trailer, but I hope we get his classic skeletal steed and on foot and all that stuff. I'm looking forward to his personal elite unit, if he gets a guard unit, which would be the Drakenhof Templars, which are a personal unit that has sort of been passed down from Vlad, that each of the von Carsteins takes a lot of pride in. Manfred is a really interesting member of the Vampire Counts, because where most of them only care about sending forth hordes of undead without really caring for semblance of order, Manfred's actually noted for wanting, kind of mimicking an actual semblance of regiments and orders within his armies, which is actually pretty unusual for an undead. And it's almost pointed out as something a little funny, because he looks down upon the structures of civilization and mankind, yet he unwittingly mimics them. So, in essence, I hope he'll be very powerful. Of course, I don't want him to be as good as, say, Karl Franz is in combat, but I expect him to be better than Balthazar Gelt, if that makes sense. So he's able to hold his own in combat, yes, and can even fight, if he's flying, can handle other flyers and things of that nature. But he should still be a caster lord over being a melee lord, though he will probably be the most balanced between the two ideas that we've seen of the 8, or excuse me, if you're counting Chaos, of the 11 legendary lords we've received so far. I would expect him to be the most balanced between fighter and caster. Lots of summoning abilities. Of course, we have no idea how that will work yet, if you'll be able to just raise dead from units that you already have, or if you even can raise dead, which I'm sure you can, but we have yet to see how that mechanic works, so there's kind of a lot of empty holes there. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up Manfred von Carstein. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it was a long one. There's a lot of information on this character. I mean, if I had gone in detail with the end times, we would have been here for days. I enjoyed this. This is kind of the Halloween episode. I know it's a day late, but there was a lot to do with this video. Alright, thanks again so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff if you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, good for you. You're a trooper. If you'll do me a favor, if you click on the center of the shield, you'll be taken to my Patreon page, which I just finished setting up the other day, and it has a video on there explaining what all that's about if you're not really sure what it's about, and you'll get all the information you need for there. In the description down below and on the 2act/Warhammer thing, I'm going to put links to my Twitter and my Facebook, so that if you want to follow on there, or so you can be able to contact me with questions or just see when I'm posting out videos, because I post kind of a schedule and what I'm doing on there, then you can go ahead and do that. So thanks again so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.